November 24th, 1963, 11:21 a.m. Dallas Police Department basement. 70 million Americans are watching live television. Lee Harvey Oswald, the man accused of assassinating President Kennedy 2 days earlier, is being transferred to county jail. Reporters crowd the hallway, cameras roll, and then, out of nowhere, a man in a dark suit lunges forward. Jack Ruby, nightclub owner. A single gunshot. Oswald collapses. America watches a murder happen live on national TV. Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald. That much is undisputed. But why? Ruby claimed he did it for Jackie Kennedy. He said he wanted to spare her the pain of a trial. He said he acted alone, out of grief and anger. But the evidence tells a different story. A story the FBI didn't want investigated. A story buried in phone records, witness testimonies, and mob connections that ran from Dallas to New Orleans to Chicago. Jack Ruby wasn't a patriot. He was an errand boy for organized crime. He ran illegal gambling operations. He trafficked guns to Cuba. He had documented ties to 3 of the most powerful mafia bosses in America: Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, Sam Giancana. All 3 had motive to kill Kennedy. All 3 had connections to Ruby. And all 3 were investigated by Robert Kennedy's Justice Department in 1963. 2 days after JFK's assassination, Ruby silenced the only man who could tell the truth about who really killed the president. Was it coincidence? Or was Jack Ruby ordered by the mob to eliminate Lee Harvey Oswald before he could talk? If you want to understand why the most important murder witness in American history was killed on live television, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what you're about to hear is the evidence they buried for 60 years. Back to Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was born Jacob Rubenstein on March 25, 1911, in Chicago, Illinois. He grew up in the Jewish ghetto on the West Side. Poverty, crime, violence. By age 16, Ruby was running errands for Al Capone's organization. Small-time hustles, illegal gambling. He wasn't a made man, but he was connected. He knew people, and those connections followed him for the rest of his life. In 1947, Ruby moved to Dallas, Texas. He changed his name from Rubenstein to Ruby. He opened a series of nightclubs: the Silver Spur, the Sovereign Club, the Carousel Club. On the surface, Ruby was a legitimate businessman, but his clubs were fronts. Illegal gambling operations ran in the back rooms. Prostitution, drugs. The Dallas Police Department knew. Some officers were on Ruby's payroll. He gave them free drinks, cash payments, access to the women who worked at his clubs. Ruby had friends in the police department. That's how he got into the basement on November 24th. But Ruby's connections went far beyond Dallas. According to FBI records declassified in the 1990s, Jack Ruby had direct ties to organized crime figures across the country. He traveled frequently to New Orleans, Chicago, and Miami. He met with mob bosses. He made phone calls to their associates. And in the months leading up to JFK's assassination, Ruby's contact with these figures increased dramatically. In September 1963, 2 months before Kennedy was killed, Jack Ruby placed a phone call to Irwin Weiner, a Chicago mob associate who handled finances for organized crime. In October, Ruby called Barney Baker, a lieutenant for Jimmy Hoffa, the Teamsters Union boss who hated Robert Kennedy. In November, just days before the assassination, Ruby contacted Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris, 2 mob hitmen with ties to Sam Giancana. The FBI documented all of these calls, but they never fully investigated them. Why? Because the men Ruby was calling were connected to the 3 most powerful mafia bosses in America: Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, Sam Giancana. 3 names that terrified law enforcement in the 1960s. And all 3 wanted John F. Kennedy dead. Carlos Marcello controlled organized crime in Louisiana and Texas. In 1961, Attorney General Robert Kennedy had Marcello arrested and deported to Guatemala. Marcello was thrown out of a plane in the jungle. According to FBI informant Ed Becker, Marcello said in September 1962, "When you cut down a tree, you start at the top." The top meant President Kennedy. Santo Trafficante ran mob operations in Cuba before Castro. When Castro's revolution shut down Havana's casinos, Trafficante lost millions. He blamed Kennedy for refusing to invade Cuba. According to Cuban exile José Alemán, Trafficante said in 1962, "Kennedy's not going to make it to the election. He's going to be hit." Sam Giancana controlled Chicago. The mob helped Kennedy win Illinois in 1960 through voter fraud. They expected favors. But Robert Kennedy launched the largest crackdown on organized crime in history. Giancana was furious. Kennedy betrayed them. All three bosses had motive. All three had resources. And all three had connections to Jack Ruby. The Warren Commission said Ruby had minimal mob ties. But the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1978 found Ruby had extensive connections to organized crime. They documented his phone calls, meetings, and travel. In the months before the assassination, Ruby made over 100 long-distance calls to mob figures. September 1963, Ruby called Irwin Weiner, a financier for Sam Giancana. October, Ruby called Barney Baker, Jimmy Hoffa's enforcer, with 50 arrests. November, Ruby contacted Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaras, mob hitman connected to Giancana. Ruby had direct ties to Carlos Marcello's organization. He met multiple times with Joseph Civello, Marcello's Dallas representative who ran illegal gambling. They were seen together at Ruby's Carousel Club. Ruby also traveled to Cuba when Santo Trafficante controlled Havana's casinos. According to journalist John Wilson, Ruby met with Trafficante associate Louis McWillie in 1959. Ruby admitted the visit, but called it a vacation. The FBI never believed him. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested November 22, 1963. He told reporters, "I'm just a patsy." He insisted he was framed. If Oswald was telling the truth, someone else killed Kennedy. Someone who needed Oswald silenced before he could talk. Jack Ruby killed Oswald 48 hours later. Oswald never testified, never stood trial. His death closed the investigation. The Warren Commission concluded Oswald acted alone because the key witness was dead. Why would the mob want Oswald dead? Because Oswald had mob connections. Witnesses saw Oswald at mob establishments in New Orleans, summer 1963. He met David Ferry, a pilot for Carlos Marcello. He visited Guy Bannister's office, a former FBI agent with ties to anti-Castro groups and organized crime. Oswald's uncle, Charles Dutz Merritt, was a bookmaker for Marcello's operation. If Oswald talked, he could link the assassination to the mob. Ruby's job was to make sure Oswald never talked. After shooting Oswald, Ruby was arrested for murder. In the months that followed, Ruby made statements suggesting he wasn't acting alone. He told reporters, "The world will never know the true facts." He told Chief Justice Earl Warren, "I want to tell the truth, but I can't do it here. My life is in danger." He begged to be taken to Washington where he could speak freely. Warren refused. In 1965, Ruby told psychiatrist Dr. Werner Teuter, "They're going to kill me." He became paranoid. He told his lawyer, "I was framed to kill Oswald." But Ruby never named names. He was too afraid. December 1966, Ruby was diagnosed with lung cancer. He died January 3rd, 1967, 3 years after killing Oswald. Ruby told friends, "They gave me cancer." He believed he had been murdered. He died without revealing the truth. Did the mob order Jack Ruby to kill Lee Harvey Oswald? The evidence is overwhelming. Ruby had ties to Marcello, Trafficante, and Giancana. He made over 100 calls to mob figures before the assassination. He silenced the only man who could expose the conspiracy, and he spent his life terrified the same people would kill him. The Warren Commission called Ruby a lone nut, acting out of sympathy. But the House Select Committee concluded in 1979 that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. An organized crime had motive, means, and opportunity. They didn't name Ruby directly, but the connections were clear. If Ruby was ordered by the mob, the JFK assassination wasn't a lone gunman. It was a coordinated conspiracy, and the men who ordered it got away with murder. If this evidence made you question the official story, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Do you believe Ruby was ordered to kill Oswald, or did he act alone? Share your city. Share your thoughts. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. Thank you for watching. And remember, history doesn't repeat, but it sure as hell rhymes.